What can you tell me about this man who has been arrested, the creator of this profile, Keegan Kline?
All I can say about Keegan is that entire issue and the entire release has allowed us to glean significant investigative leads. That's all I can say about him.
I do think we've investigated it, and maybe this is just asking for the public's help and to find people that have had contact with this person who is out there.
Anthony Shots. Ever heard of him?
I wish. New information to us as of last night before everybody else, but still new information.
Do you think it's possible that your sister and Abby were communicating with this account?
I think that the account is definitely important and that we have to keep sharing it and putting it out there because for whatever reason, law enforcement thinks it's important.
Why do you think investigators are putting so much focus on you right now?
I have not a clue. I think it's because they said I was the last person to talk to her, is what they've told me.
He was interacting with Libby and Abby
to some degree, and we don't know exactly what that interaction is. I do know that Libby's sister, Kelsi, did get in touch with that fake profile while the girls were missing.
You did communicate with the Anthony Shots account, according to documents now, like the same day she was missing, right?
I did. I spoke to him on Libby's social media.
Anthony Shots. Ever heard of him?
I wish. New information to us.
So there was an account, it was active from 2016 and 2017, Anthony_shots on Instagram as well as other social media platforms, and they're just asking that anybody that's ever communicated with this account come forward and talk to them.
I remember that name. I know I talked to that person that night, and I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think it was important.
I wish.
And to find people that have had contact with this person.
The Anthony Shots persona was first introduced to the Delphi zeitgeist in a YouTube video uploaded by ISP on December 6, 2021, briefly titled Indiana State Police Delphi News. This strange announcement took us all by shock, adding a whole new dimension that spoke to the original epithet attached to the case, which was the Snapchat murders, before being rebranded, so to speak, as the Delphi murders. Redditors, content creators, and local media pounced on this mysterious yet salacious update, fueling countless theories on what role this information could have possibly played in the infamous case that was starting to go cold. In the just over 2-minute video, Sergeant Jeremy Pierce announced that the Delphi Task Force was pursuing a new lead in connection with the murders of Abby and Libby, related to a catfishing account under the username Anthony_shots. The account depicted images of a known male model sporting chiseled abs and a boyish smile, a guaranteed heartthrob for unsuspecting teen girls. ISP says the man in the images, identified as Vincent Kowalski, who is now reportedly a police officer in Alaska, is not a person of interest in the investigation, but that his images were stolen for the purpose of soliciting sexual images from underage females. Upon searching Kowalski's name, there are dozens of accounts and fan pages displaying his images, including the same ones used for the Anthony Shots profile. The day after ISP's bizarre YouTube announcement introducing the Anthony Shots profile, Wish TV reported the connection between the profile and Keegan Kline, a now 30-year-old man from Peru, Indiana, which is about 40 miles east of Delphi. This connection was supported by a probable cause affidavit filed in August 2020, when Kline was arrested on 30 felonies, including child exploitation, possession of child pornography, obstruction of justice, and synthetic identity deception. According to the heavily redacted PCA, Klein admitted to receiving about 100 sexual images and about 20 sexually explicit videos from at least 15 underage girls through fake social media accounts. In April 2023, Klein agreed to plead guilty to 25 felony charges. At his sentencing in July, investigators testified that they had identified a total of 11 victims, most of whom lived within driving distance of Miami County. Many other victims, however, remained unidentified. The Miami County deputy prosecutor described Klein as a monster who manipulated and victimized young girls. When given the opportunity to address the court, Klein cried when he apologized to the victims, stating, "I was depressed and lonely. I knew it was wrong, but I liked the attention. I'm truly sorry to each and every one of them." He maintained he never planned to meet up with any of them. A judge then sentenced him to 40 years in prison with 3 years suspended. Keegan Anthony Klein is a predator with a profound lack of criminal intelligence and, frankly, terrible luck. On February 25th, 2017, 11 days after the bodies of Abby and Libby were found, ISP and FBI executed a search warrant on Klein's home in Peru. Although redacted, the PCA states that, while working with ISP case redacted, the FBI sent information to the ISP's cybercrimes unit that an adult male was soliciting female juveniles utilizing social media platforms Instagram and Snapchat through the username Anthony Shots. In association with the foregoing investigation, which can be safely assumed to be the Delphi double homicide, subpoenas were sent to both Snapchat and Instagram for records on the Shots profile, which returned a Comcast IP address linked to Klein's Peru address. The subpoenas revealed that the Snapchat account was registered on July 14th, 2016, and the Instagram account was registered about a week later on July 20th, 2016. Later that day, on February 25th, 2017, Klein agreed to speak with ISP and FBI investigators. While he initially denied creating the fake accounts and talking to underage girls, he fessed up later in the interview, making several incriminating admissions regarding his solicitation of underage females. However, Klein maintained his innocence, denying any knowledge of the murders of the girls in Delphi. He even took a polygraph in association with the Delphi case, the results of which are unclear. All of his devices were seized at that time, which the PCA revealed contained hundreds of CSAM files, incriminating web searches, and many conversations with underage females through social media apps. One of these underage females happened to be 14-year-old Liberty German, who tragically wound up dead on a creek bank just 11 days earlier, and whose phone data revealed that the Anthony Shots account was one of the last people in contact with the teen before her death. A careful review of the available evidence supports that Klein's involvement in the murders is limited to a short period of contact between Libby and Anthony Shots. Klein voluntarily submitted a DNA and hair follicle test. Authorities have all of his phone records, including his GPS data, which doesn't place him anywhere near Delphi during the window of the crime. He's never been charged or formally declared a suspect in the Delphi case. Investigators even admitted to him during his interrogation that they don't believe he's directly involved in the killings, but it appeared they needed to tie up some inconsistencies found in the interactions between Libby and Anthony Shots. I'll expand on this in a little bit. They reference potential evidence of Klein's consciousness of guilt, including deleting data from his devices and making numerous searches about the homicides and the ongoing investigation in the days immediately following the murders. Klein readily explains that he was paranoid upon hearing the news, admitting that he recognized Libby's name as someone he had been in contact with through Instagram and Snapchat, which is true. His interest in the case and subsequent obstruction of justice, in my opinion, is understandable given the precarious position his criminal conduct placed him in. Klein was 22 years old in 2017 when he was knowingly conversing with and soliciting pornographic images and videos from underage girls through a false identity. One of those girls he believed he was in contact with was now a nationally recognized murder victim, her name and face plastered all over the news alongside her best friend Abigail. What's more, the publicly released images of Bridge Guy confirmed that Libby's phone, or at least the data on her phone to include Snapchat, was recovered forensically in the days immediately after the killings. He had to have figured it was only a matter of time before law enforcement came knocking on his door, and 11 days later, they did. An inquiry that apparently didn't turn up any incriminating evidence for the Delphi case, but which ultimately led to his 30 felony charges in a completely separate case 3 years later. I submit that if Libby's phone was never recovered from the crime scene, it's very likely that Klein would be a free man today. He most likely wouldn't be spending the next 43 years in the custody of Indiana Department of Corrections, and he wouldn't be nationally recognized as a child predator or worse, possible murderer, his name and face forever associated with the highest profile murders in the state of Indiana's history. Let that sink in. You don't have to feel sorry for a convicted child predator to acknowledge the misfortune that these murders brought upon Keegan Anthony Klein. The extent of contact Klein as Anthony Schatz had with who he believed to be Libby is unclear, but from what I can gather through the transcripts, contact began in early February 2017 in the days and weeks leading up to the murder. It's stated that Libby added Klein on Instagram, and he vaguely remembers talking to her and a friend at a sleepover, but he says he blocked Libby because he felt she was annoying, and investigators seem to agree with this, but suggest that photos were exchanged, which Klein maintains he can't recall. The transcript also vaguely mentions money being exchanged between Libby and the Anthony Schatz profile. Was Libby, or someone pretending to be her, exchanging images for money? You may be wondering why I'm bringing all of this up now, and decided to dedicate a whole tentacle to this seemingly resolved portion of the case. Hasn't this all been litigated and discussed to death online? It has, but I submit to you that the public missed key takeaways from the unveiling of this portion of the investigation. I will show you what I mean by this through logical deductions I have made by examining the available evidence uncovered by the dovetailed investigations. Doug Carter described the Anthony Schatz disclosure as dynamic and strategic, resulting in significant investigative leads. And I will show you what I speculate he may have meant by this. Aside from the PCA, most of the information we know about Klein, his predatory catfishing scheme, and potential connection to the Delphi case comes from 2 sets of transcripts, both which were released to the public by Murder Sheet in March of 2022. This is an important marker in the case. The first is Klein's heavily redacted 194-page transcript of his interrogation with ISP upon his arrest in 2020. And the second is a 25-page transcript of a media interview between Klein and HLN's Barbara McDonald a couple days after the December 2021 ISP announcement and Wish TV's reporting revealing Klein's identity as the Anthony Schatz account owner. The interrogation is a tough read due to a lot of redactions, but there are several key bits of information and admissions that I was able to pull. The Barbara McDonald interview is unredacted and contains one key question that puts my prime suspect directly in the hot seat, forcing her to backtrack on her lies, specifically her insistence that she did not know anything about or have any contact with the Anthony Schatz profile.
Right? Or was it this year?
It was like, I think it was December 2021.
2021. They come back and say, hey, like, we're releasing this account. And I was sitting in this seat when my grandma called me. Law enforcement called me first, and my grandpa wasn't answering his phone, actually. So he called me and said, hey, Kelsi, we need to talk to your grandpa. And I'm like, it's 7:30 at night. What do you need to talk to my grandpa about that you can't tell me? And I don't think they wanted to tell me. I think they knew how devastated I was going to be. And it's easier to tell my grandpa things, I guess, than it is to tell me or my grandma. So they talked to my grandpa. My grandma calls me back. And I just remember feeling so angry. I was sitting here and I was like, I remember that name. I know I talked to that person that night. And I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think it was important. And I just sobbed, and Caleb stood here and held me for like at least half an hour. He was trying to calm me down. I was not calming down. I was devastated. I felt like a bad sister. I felt like I didn't know my sister for a minute. That's really what spiraled me into like this bad mental health crisis in my brain, where I had to stop and take a step back. That's
probably a good idea.
That was really hard for me.
Kelsi's reaction to the release of the Anthony Shots information was extreme. Her entire demeanor observably shifted when the public was informed about Anthony Shots. She became visibly nervous whenever the topic was brought up. I mean, we haven't seen a rash like that since her first TV appearance sitting next to Doug Carter on Dr. Phil. Kelsi significantly decreased the amount of media interviews and public statements she made after this information went public. Despite the Anthony Shots announcement being the first development in her sister's unsolved murder case in over 2 years, signifying progress in the investigation, Kelsi described her devastation at the release of this information, even stating that it caused her to spiral into a mental health crisis. She says she even became angry at Libby, the victim who lost her life at such a young age, telling the media that she would write angry letters to Libby and would visit her gravestone to yell at her. Yeah, you're not going to convince me this girl isn't disturbed.
And also, I think I saw you in a video one time you were a little bit upset with Libby even. Like, because she didn't tell you about this or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm still angry with her. I feel like, and that's valid. I'm allowed to be angry with my sister.
Yeah.
And people keep telling me I'm not, and I don't think they understand. Like, me and Libby told each other everything. I thought we told each other everything. And so finding out that something this big was kept from me, from like the person I told everything to and the person that I thought told everything to me, and like we shared everything. And so to find out that I didn't know about this and that she felt like she couldn't trust me with something, I think really hurt me. And I think a lot of times when that happens in friendships, like for example with Bree, if something happens and she didn't tell me about it, then we would talk about it and we would have a conversation and we wouldn't be angry with each other forever. But my sister's gone. I can't have that conversation with her. And so I have to get through that anger on my own without having that conversation. And a lot of that is going to therapy and telling my therapist, like, right now I'm really angry. Like, I wish I could see my sister right now, and I think I would scream at her. I think I would yell at her. I would also hug her and tell her I love her and how she was the best sister ever. But there are also times when, like, man, like, I wish that I could just scream at her and tell her how dumb she was.
I believe Kelsi when she says she is angry. But it's not because Libby didn't tell her about Anthony's shots. That's just her excuse to justify and deflect her anger back onto the scapegoat. The real reason for her scorn is born out of fear of losing control of the narrative and ultimately her freedom. From December 7th, 2021 until March 2022, Kelsi lied in at least 4 separate filmed media interviews when she misrepresented her knowledge of the account to the public, only to change her tune after the release of Barbara McDonald's interview, where Barbara asked Keegan if he remembered communicating with Kelsi German on the night of February 13th. Now, if Kelsi had just kept her mouth shut, I wouldn't be able to clock this as a lie. I'm not sure where Barbara McDonald got this information, and there wasn't any supporting evidence to support the claim. But Miss Kelsi couldn't help herself, running to Facebook to conduct damage control after the transcript's release, which essentially corroborated Barbara's claim. Those of us who have been keen to her deception sat back and watched her spin an entirely new tangled web of lies, making sure to archive everything in hopes of someday holding her accountable. She posted this comment on Facebook after some followers of the case brought the issue to her attention. She wrote, "I'm not sure why people are so upset about it. I've said many times there are things I am still remembering to this day, and as I remember them, law enforcement is made aware immediately. I contacted several people that I found Libby had been in contact with the evening of February 13th as we were sitting in the police station. I was trying to get as much information as I could to figure out where the girls were. Anthony Shots ended up being one of the accounts I messaged. Law enforcement has the details of that conversation, but just know that the short discussion I had with the account threw up no red flags and gave no indication that the account knew anything of Libby and Abby's whereabouts. It was a 5-minute conversation. I never talked to the account again, and I didn't think about it again until years later. Not only do I have to live with the fact that I communicated with an account that could possibly be connected with my sister's death, as if that's not traumatic enough, I now have to watch groups dissect my intentions and twist my every word in a million directions. And just like that, Kelsi played herself. I recently made a video where I referred to the whole sweatshirt debacle as KG's biggest and most consequential lie she's told. And if that's the case, then this lie comes in close second. It is inadequate for her to say she is still remembering things to this day, which would be a viable excuse had she not boldly denied knowledge of the account in several media interviews in the preceding months. If she had suddenly remembered interacting with the account upon seeing the pictures and hearing the name, why didn't she immediately come forward to ISP when they were specifically appealing to people who knew about or contacted the account to come forward? She only fessed up when she was caught in her lie, and she isn't criminally intelligent enough to keep her damn mouth shut. The lies surrounding this topic don't stop here though, because a whole separate issue is which specific method she used to have what she calls a short discussion with Keegan Kline through the Anthony Shots account. There are at least 3 contradictory claims as to the method used to communicate with Anthony Shots on the night of the 13th at the police station. The first story Kelsi tells is archived in a Facebook comment, expanding on the no red flags comment. These were both published shortly after the transcript release. Kelsi clarifies that she contacted Anthony Shots from her social media accounts. She further states that she had Libby's social media passwords, so she could log on to see who Libby was communicating with that night. Not sure why we're letting 17-year-old Kelsi have unrestricted access to the missing child's social media accounts, but I digress. So the presumption here is that Kelsi logged into Libby's Snapchat and or Instagram, went through her recent messages, observed the Anthony Shots account, then added this unknown person to her own social media and messaged him, all from the police station. If she was already logged into Libby's socials, why not just message people directly from there? Hey, this is Libby's big sister. Her and Abby are currently missing. I saw you two were communicating earlier today. Any idea where she's at? Why take the extra step to add the profile in an emergency situation? Kelsi unequivocally states that she did not message the account using Libby's socials or phone, a statement which directly contradicts claims she made in a Gray Hughes live stream in July 2023.
You did communicate with the Anthony Shots account, according to documents now, like the same day she was missing, right?
I did. I spoke to him on Libby's social media.
Just texting though, right?
Just texting, and the conversation wasn't anything that sounded suspicious. It didn't bring anything back to me. So the conversation was short. We barely talked. And then when law enforcement said there's no social media, it just was pushed to the back of my mind, and I didn't think about it again until a few years later when the name was brought up to me again by law enforcement.
I also find it suspicious how just last month you were denying having any knowledge of the account, but now you can recall with such clarity the specific method of communication you used, and that you remember specifically that there were no red flags or anything indicating that this person knew where Libby was. You can't have it both ways, Kels. You either forgot about the exchange, which would perhaps explain why you were silent on it for years and lied to the public several times, but now you're also expecting us to take your recollection of the conversation as fact? Make that make sense. So we have the inconsistency of whether it was Kelsi's socials or Libby's socials used to contact Shots that night. But there is a third scenario that Barbara McDonald expanded on in a Court TV segment around the time of Allen's arrest in November 2022. I will play that clip for you here.
Picture of a male model to entice little girls, right? But he was interacting with Libby and Abby
to some degree, and we don't know exactly what that interaction is. I do know that Libby's sister, Kelsi, did get in touch with that fake profile while the girls were missing and inquired. She was working with a friend, and they reached out through the friend's profile and said, hey, do you know anything? And the response from whoever was using the profile at that time was, oh, I'm sure she'll turn up. I was supposed to meet her, but, she didn't show. So the police have all that information. They have all that text messages. They have Kegan's phone. So if there is that evidence, hopefully we'll find out what that link is.
It's reasonable to deduce that the unnamed friend in question is Brianne Bree Wilbur, Kelsi's bestie and maid of honor, and the sister of Kelsi's boyfriend at the time, Chase Wilbur. The three of them are also each other's alibis. Another fun fact about Bree is that in 2019, she was granted the Abigail Williams Scholarship by her partner in crime, Kelsi. Interesting, because she really does resemble Abigail, both slender with a heart-shaped face and gingery hair. It's almost like she could have played Abigail in the role of a lifetime, starring alongside her bestie playing Libby.
Remember the witness who said that she walked out to the bridge and saw a man standing on it, and then she passed what she believes were Abby and Libby as she was walking back to her car? Well, the defense says that the state left out that woman's description of the man she saw. She described a young man, possibly in his 20s, clean-shaven with a boyish look.
Remember, there is no proof of life for Abby and Libby for February 13th. Every indication of Abby and Libby's activity on the 13th is unverifiable, i.e. no way to tell who was operating accounts associated with Libby, or it comes from the testimony of family members who have told countless versions of events. I submit that the staging begins on the morning of the 13th, with a message to Anthony Shots disguised as Libby asking him to meet up at Highbridge, or just simply informing him of the plan to go there that day. We then have these staged images that do not show Libby at all, and Abby is heavily photoshopped using an older pic of her. Bree places herself on the trails that day, though not at the same time as Kelsi, as this would raise suspicion. I conclude someone else dropped Kelsi and Bree off, and all witnesses who claim to have seen Abby and Libby actually saw Bree and Kelsi. They made their way to the bridge, where the bridge guy Decoy was ready for his performance. Kelsi recorded the 43-second video of the staged abduction, making sure the footage was blurry and unstable, and only partially capturing Bree, who was pretending to be Abigail. After the trip to stage the evidence was complete, the trio headed to the Wilbur's house. Kelsi says in a Facebook comment that Bree was at the trails with a group of friends prior to her dropping the girls off, and that Bree walked back to her house while Kelsi was there. Chase and Bree's dad was at the house with them. When Chase left for work, and this is around 4:30, Bree and me were at the house with her dad. I got the call a little later while we were watching a movie. Bree and her dad were at the house when I left. Bree later came with me to the police station.
I do know that Libby's sister, Kelsi, did get in touch with that fake profile while the girls were missing and inquired. She was working with a friend, and they reached out through the friend's profile and said, hey, you know, do you know anything? And the response from whoever was using the profile at that time was, oh, I'm sure she'll turn up. I was supposed to meet her.
Another indicator that points to Bree as potentially involved with the Anthony Shots account comes from the Brandon Woodhouse leaks. Y'all remember this from early on in Alan's case? Long story short, defense counsel Andrew Baldwin accidentally emailed a discovery index to this guy Woodhouse, and it was leaked online. Part of that index was a list of interviews conducted in the case, including an interview with Breanne Wilbur at the U.S. Marshal's Office on August 27th, 2020. This is 8 days after Keegan's arrest and interrogation, which focused heavily on this conversation on the night of the 13th about possibly meeting up with Liberty German. There's a reason the U.S. Marshals brought Bree in, and something tells me it's in connection to the Anthony Shots account and its role in the Delphi case. This also coincides with Kelsi's complaints of being interrogated by federal investigators numerous times over the years.
I was interrogated then, and then I was brought in again, probably a year or so later maybe, and then I went in again recently and talked to them. But it's not really like questioning. It's just because over time, people remember things that they didn't remember before. So it's so normal. Yeah, I was like, stop making me feel like I'm a suspect. Like, because in the beginning, since I was the last person to see them, like, they had to talk to me like that. Like, they had to. And I understand that now. But at the time, I felt like they were pushing too hard, and I just needed a minute, and I didn't even get a minute to take a breath. So I was probably really rude to that FBI agent. I'm not sorry that I was really rude to him. He was kind of rude, so.
Based on my knowledge closely following this case and talking to folks, I've learned that Kelsi and Bree were mean girls. I absolutely would not put it past these two to have created a fake account pretending to be Libby, as well as an account claiming to be Libby's friend that Keegan mainly corresponded with in order to build credibility. Through these accounts, they established contact with Anthony Shots in early February, targeting the pervert behind the account as an intended patsy for the carefully premeditated crime. This would explain the inconsistencies about which account was used to contact Shots and why Kelsi had her sister's social media passwords. I submit that Libby would never give her passwords to Kelsi, but the reason Kelsi had them is because it was a fake account that never belonged to Libby. Then, on the morning of the 13th, Kelsi Snapchat messaged Anthony Shots about going to Highbridge, planting breadcrumbs and possibly even hoping to lure Keegan to the fabricated crime scene during the fabricated time frame, and he fell right into her trap. Which is why Kelsi tweeted on the morning of the 13th, "Some boys are incredibly dumb."
25 charges of child exploitation and possession of child porn more than a year ago. The judge in the case sentenced him to 40 years in prison.